Hey everyone, I hope you're doing well. And today I have the honor and privilege of speaking with Dr. Kishonna Gray. Kishonna, how are you today?
I'm doing very well. Thank you for having me.
Well, thank you for being on. I kind of want to give a little bit of background to who you are and what you do for everyone at home.
Absolutely. So, I guess in my official professional role, I'm an assistant professor at the University of Illinois at Chicago. In my personal life, I am a mom who's a gamer, and gaming is my life. I've been a lifelong gamer, and my children are gamers. So we have like a whole household. Like there's multiple consoles in every bedroom, every room, living room, everywhere. It's kind of crazy actually. But I research video games, and I developed the passion for the research part only in graduate school when I realized that gaming was something that could be like an academic endeavor. I didn't realize that, until I had an office mate. He was doing his research in video games, and I was like, "Wow, we could do that." And he was like, "Yeah, we can." And so, I kind of switched, and it stuck. So I am a cultural scholar of video games.
Nice. I know we have a few people here at the University of Kentucky. I know the first interview we did for this was Dr. Anthony Lampiris, and he does research in gaming based, and I've helped him on a few projects of just helping him like understand a little bit more about streaming. So that's really cool that it's just like it's cool to see people researching video games. It's something that I feel like in the research part of the world, it's not really talked about as much. And
Right.
like I had a professor always kind of hint at like we don't know the implications of modern technology, and we're starting to like research them. So that's really cool that gaming's part of it. I do want to ask then, talk about your research and what you've done.
Sure, absolutely. So, my earliest work, I guess, stemming like from my dissertation work, really just explored the experiences and realities and of women of color, of Black and Brown women in Xbox Live and PlayStation Network, like in these online gaming communities. And it was not a big shocker for me, for what I found, because I came into this work because of my own experiences as a Black woman in gaming. And so, I really became interested, like in graduate school, around this kind of research because of my own experiences, my personal experiences, with racism and sexism in the gaming space. And so I immediately just reached out to, the folks who I considered, friends, some of the folks that I played with like online. And of course, they all said the same thing. Everybody was telling the same story. And that story was that, when we entered like a gaming space and when somebody could hear how we sounded, they would immediately engage in a whole barrage of racist speech or sexist speech or xenophobic, kind of like, speech. If, we had friends that spoke with accents and, so there will be all kind of colorful, like language, directed, towards us. And so that early work led me down like a pathway, like to really explore this through linguistic profiling, because it was during that time where, it wasn't, video, wasn't really a thing. Streaming wasn't really a thing. So all these communities, most communities were text-based, but some of the console communities were more, were voice audio based, right? So, everybody just went by how you sound. And I was really, I got intrigued with this research because I remember during that time I had took a class, where the researchers, were talking about the liberatory potentials of how like these internet and digital technologies could free us from the confines of the body, right? Where we can go online, and that New Yorker magazine, on the internet, nobody knows you're a dog. That has never been true for women, people of color. That has just never been true, right? Because there is this assumption that all dogs are white dudes, and then, whenever you, factor in other elements, our real world bodies and our real world selves are actually emitted into these digital spaces. So we can't, I remember reading, it was a really cool, there was like somebody had wrote an article about their experiences in like some of the earlier chat groups, like the sex chat groups. I promise it's not going to get graphic. I'm just going to share a bit. I promise it's not too graphic. But and as there were two people going back and forth, about how the things that they wanted to do to each other, like sexually, right? And then, the gentleman who, from the reading it, we could probably presume he was a white man, he said, I want to rub my hands over your vanilla body. And the response was, well, it's a little more chocolate, but please continue to rub, And then that like ended the whole thing. It was like, hey, wait a minute, you're Black? And she was like, yeah, is that okay? So all this time they had been like engaging like in this chat space, and he never knew, that she was Black. But it was like those small kinds of like cues that had, revealed, aspects of her identity. Whereas, she thought they were just like engaging and it didn't matter, what their physical bodies were, but, it actually did. So I was fascinated by that. I wanted to explore like the different ways that, how do we, disclose of those kinds of things, whether intentional or not intentional. Like, so for instance, like our speech practices, how somebody might pronounce some words in a space, or, the pauses that some people might take. Like I have to take a pause, like to go check on kids. And some people might assume, well, that's a person who's a woman who has children that has to go, go check on kids, so there are different ways, these different kinds of coded ways that, our race and our gender and different aspects of our identity are like emitted into these, digital spaces. So that was my earlier work. And so now, I'm continuing. I think I'm just ending really like this 10-year ethnography, so once, my dissertation, I did that data and that was done. And so I continued it and I started asking different questions and started exploring these different things. So that book is going to be released in the fall, actually, Intersectional Tech. And so that's where my research is right now.
Nice. That's actually really cool. I know I haven't had the privilege to do as much research. I just wrapped up my undergraduate, but like I had a couple classes, one of them a hybrid between grad and undergrad. We talked about like the gaming industry and like how there is a lot of good that it's done and doing, but there also is a lot of negative, especially when it comes to diversity and inclusivity and just being more open, unfortunately. And there are games that are working for that, like we talked about in the class, but I like hearing your research on that really is like eye-opening to me, because I feel like I might have actually referenced one of your research papers in my paper at one point. So
awesome.
I think I'd have to double back and check, but I'd have
hashtag cite her work. Hashtag cite her work. Flash that on the screen.
we'll do that too, I'm sure. So I do have to ask then, kind of talk about just your personal opinion and your experiences with esports and kind of like the sudden boom, especially now with the world that we're living in.
Absolutely. So I kind of accidentally fell into like esports research, right? So within ethnography, and ethnography allows me like the freedom to basically explore particular cultures without like the strict parameters of, keeping like research contained, because a lot of research, you have, strict protocols, of like, strict questionnaires, you have to control all the variables, right? And so an ethnography allows me to just kind of like observe a phenomenon as it's happening, right? And so one of the phenomena that happened while I was exploring, doing this research was, the Twitch and Mixer, the streaming technologies. And so I had a lot of folks who were part of that study were like, hey, we're going to be doing streaming now. And I'm like, oh, what's that? What's streaming? And so they introduced me to this world of streaming. And so one of the first conversations that I had with them, this was there were conversations with men who identify as Black men. And they made the comment, they said, we thought it was going to be cool, but we didn't factor, how people would respond to us when they see us on the screen, seeing like a Black man on this screen. And one of in the comment section, it's always the comment section. So, they started like looking through their comment section and seeing how racialized it was, right? And they said it wasn't like it wasn't always, overtly racist. But like, for instance, there was like, and this is like the title of one of my articles. Actually, it's not one of the titles of one of my articles, but there was a comment inside there that I thought was very, very significant. That that commenter posted on this Black man streaming page and said, you'd have a larger following if you weren't so urban. And then, the guy, he asked me, he was like, what does that mean? Like, if I wasn't so urban, like, what is he trying to say? Like, I'm too city-like? I'm like, no, that's racial code for you're too Black. And then so we started talking about like the content, that he had like on his streams. And he said, well, I don't really talk about like Black issues. And this was like right before, Black Lives Matter, kind of like, even before Gamergate. So it was before a lot of those things. This was just like this early conversation. And he said, I'm just going on the game. I'm playing the game. I'm giving folks strategies on how to like beat the game. That's all I'm doing. And I said, that's something that he never really, he understands that he's like a Black man, but he had never like, I don't want to say he had deracialized his platform. He just wanted to be like a gamer, right? He didn't want to be like a niche gamer saying, oh, I'm a black, he just said, I'm a gamer like everybody else and doing what everybody else is doing. And I said, well, that's beautiful. I love that. And I wish that could exist, that could be your reality. But when folks see you, there's this visceral reaction, because a lot of folks have never had, seen this black person that's been in this authority figure. Well, and I say authority figure, I use the word authority because, he was like, well, I'm not trying to be an authority, but I'm like, people are coming to you for information about a game. They're coming to you for strategy. So they do see you as like an authority and an expert in this, right? And so, and that poses a problem if a person has never, had like a black teacher or like a person or anybody, like any adult around them that is like a black person. It's hard for them to accept. And I was like, think about everybody's like reactions to like Obama as the first black president. Like, see where we are now because of the black dude that was in the White House. I was like, so it poses like a problem for a lot of people who aren't ready, to see different kinds of races like on an equal plane. And so what he did like an experiment, right? So in this experiment, he streamed and where he was showing his face, we could see that he was a black man. And then in another stream, he did 3 different things. And then in another stream, he streamed and he distorted his voice and had like a little puppet like on the corner of the screen that wasn't actually him. And then he distorted like the voice of that one. And then he would also stream and just show the content and wouldn't show his face at all, right? So the stream where he had, his face showing had the lowest views, right? They always consistently, nobody really tuned in for those, and those comments were very racialized. Now, in the one where he disguised and distorted his voice, those were the streams that had the most kind of most views and most hits. And in the one where he didn't show his face at all, he really didn't he couldn't really tell the difference. But the one where he had like the little puppet was very interesting, because it was one day where these were different different accounts also. So people didn't know that all this was him, right? And so in the account where he had like it was a chipmunk. I don't want to say chipmunk because then people could probably go and find out who this person is. So I'm trying to, maintain, his privacy and everything. But whenever he was like doing like the little chipmunk sounds and the chipmunk voices, like people loved that character. But it was very much, the character was rooted in like a comic relief. It was like comedic. It was like over the top, kind of like a lot of like black vernacular. It was like a lot of like stereotypical like black kinds of things happening in the stream, right? And that's not his traditional regular kind of persona. But people love that. And he wanted to know, he's like, why are people, so excited about that? I was like, well, you have to know a little bit about, how people can consume blackness in their lives, right? People can, this is like from media theory, like from like film and cinema kinds of studies, like people will consume blackness when it is given to them or fed to them in 3 different ways. One of those ways is as a criminal element, right? We consume movies, we consume characters like in a criminal light, right? That's something that's comforting and soothing for the psyche, because we know that this is like a character that is being that will that like the wheels of justice will happen, to go and get that person, control that person, incarcerate that person, so that's comforting, right? And then the other one is like as comic relief, like a buffoon kind of character. And then this character, it's not a threatening character. It's not threatening the status quo. It's not trying to get it's not trying to get power or overtake whiteness or anything like that. So that's also like the sidekick, that's like, part of like that the buddy sidekick kind of films. And even, we're seeing this theme also happening in games. And the third one is the help, right? So if you're just helping the white savior, in the movie, helping this person along, that these are non-threatening kinds of characters. And even as the criminal element, even though that's the criminal character could be threatening in some context, it's still non-threatening, because we know the police are coming at any moment to come and haul this person or this entity away, right? So that's kind of like, the process that's happening. So that's why I was letting him know, I was like, that's a very successful role, because that's something that folks know. They know the comic relief. They know the buffoon kind of character. They know this because it has existed, from caricatures of like blackness that stem back to like, blackface minstrelsy kinds of era, the silent film era. I was like, this is something that is common. So that's why it's successful. I was like, but as soon as you deviate from that, right? Because he let folks know that was him, right? And they thought that like, oh, you tricked us. This isn't who you really are. A lot of his followers really thought that he was like trying to pulling, the wool over their eyes or something. And he was like, this is all performance. Like everything that I'm doing in this stream is like performance. Like none of this is really real. Even the informational ones are performance. So I think he learned a lot about himself, but he also learned a lot about like the world during those kinds of moments. But that's kind of like been the focus of like me and watching the streams, really like experiencing like the performative elements of like what women have to do when they're streaming, what folks of color have to do when they're streaming, what people with accents have to do, either, over like jumping head in and like overdoing like an accent, like the Sofia Varga, is that her name? I think somebody, there's been like some writing about, how she like overdoes like an accent or whatever. I can't really speak to that, but I remember reading that somewhere. But it's really just interesting to like to see people who deviate from that, right? And just seeing how they're not successful, they don't do well. And then, there was another one. I'm so sorry. I'm thinking about all these examples like at one time. At the time where when Black Lives Matter, was happening, I think it was after the death of Eric Garner. One streamer that I follow, kind of dedicated a lot of his streams to like raise money for like burial. Like I think the country was kind of rallying around making sure that these folks got buried and had proper care in death. And he devoted a lot of his streams to that. And so many of his followers were like, "That's not why we watch you. Why are you doing this? This is not the space for like Black Lives Matter." And that's when he was like, "Wait a minute, this is my platform. I can do whatever I want." But I think that also like made him realize that, hey, as a public figure, as a public kind of like, gaming figure, his platform, if he wants to continue to have the success that he does, he's going to have to like give into like what audiences want. And I asked him, I was like, well, that's something that you're going to have to think, like, do you see this as your platform, or is your platform enabled by these people who are watching you and tuning in and doing likes and subscribes and, donating money? So I was like, he really had like this moment where he had to think, what kind of streamer do I want to be? And I think he dedicated, he said, I want to do the social justice work. I don't care, whatever they call me or what they do. I was like, he said, I have a platform and I want to make sure that I'm doing justice at the end of the day. Yeah. So that's kind of the streamers that like I follow, like the folks who are like accidental activists, I think is what I call them, like in my book, because a lot of them, they realized they had these huge platforms and they could reach people and they could, they could sway conversations and influence conversations. So, those are kind of like the folks that I follow. Yeah.
That's awesome. I know just in the time and the content creators that I follow too on certain communities, like it's interesting to see how much of a sway that they do have and create, and kind of at times how they don't really realize that and the power that comes with that. Like I've talked about in a couple of different classes, social media influencers and just what they actually mean and can do. So it's really interesting to see like on the Twitch level and on the video game and streaming level and esports for that matter, just like what they are and what they can mean. I do want to ask, so kind of just looking to the future in a little bit, talk about how, in your opinion, like number one, not only esports, but just the gaming community can, one, grow, and number two, just be more inclusive and more open to different demographics and just overall ideas and just overall acceptance.
Sure. I appreciate your question. It's a tough question, right? Because there are so many factors that influence my response, right? So, I think the first part of my response is just recognizing that these platforms are commodities, right? A lot of them exist like to generate profit. A lot of them exist as marketing tools, right? And then I think about, at the end of the day, a lot of folks, want to make money. They want to sustain these platforms. They want people to continue to come to the platform, right? So some folks, they asked me, for instance, why they were like propping up, like, for instance, like a person like Ninja, or why a person like PewDiePie, gets like a YouTube contract, when they have been problematic in the past, right? Mm-hmm. Racist, anti-Semitic, sexist, right? Xenophobic. And then they said, how could a person like this, who a lot of folks feel that their content is marginal, they're not that great at gaming, they're mostly like inflammatory. And then I was like, well, you have to think, let's think back to a couple moments, right? So I believe, was it last year, 2015, 2016, I believe, Ninja was on the front of the ESPN cover, right?
Yeah.
And that essentially, propped him up as like the face of the esports world, right? At the same time, Sonic Fox had won the won the Esports Gamer of the Year award, like from the main, the gaming. I can't even think about the entity, but but he won the award. He's like the number one like gamer like of the year, right? And that's like it's part like popularity contest. I think there are some metrics that go behind, how they could win, right? And these things were like incongruent for a lot of folks, right? It was like, here we have, Ninja as an entity that continues to get like propped up. But then the gaming community, rallies around like a person like Sonic Fox, right? And I was like, well, you have to think about who Sonic Fox is, right? Sonic Fox is a queer Black man, maybe he uses like they, them pronouns a whole lot. They walk around in a furry suit, that beautiful blue fox that, that they walk around in all the time, right? And I said, you have to think about, what's been constructed around like the identity of a gamer, right? Sonic Fox is not the construction of what a gamer is. Mm-hmm. In fact, Sonic Fox is like the antithesis of what a lot of folks feel, right? Because like a lot of like this tech geek masculinity, has really adopted, a lot of elements of like toxic masculinity, adopted those elements of exclusion. Like this is our space, it's like a boys' space, it's a good old boys network. We put our people on and everything. Sorry about that. They really have like, adopted like a lot of those principles. So then if you think about a person like Sonic Fox, first off, his masculinity doesn't match up right? Because he's got a queer masculinity, and then you have to think he's Black on top of that. And then people, still have the assumption that Black folks are not gamers. And here, Sonic Fox is like, at the top of their game, really outperforming, outshining, doing all these amazing things. And is a nice person, not inflammatory, not, making jokes and, saying problematic things. And then you would think that would be the one that we would rally behind and say, okay, we're not going to get in trouble. Sonic Fox is going to get, we're not going to have to apologize or go on a PR campaign, because they just spouted the N-word on their stream, right? But no, that's not what is happening, right? And so when you think about, the future of like streaming and the future of esports, that future is still going to make money, and that future is still going to be like catered to a particular demographic, a demographic that I consider like the default gamer. We're still, where white men are the ones that are, propped up and elevated as the go-to model, as the folks that we're going to aspire to and aspire to be. So with that in mind, do I think that the future of esports is inclusive? It's not going to be not by design, right? It's going to have to be like a lot of pushback and a lot of fights. And people are going to say, hey, well, what about this trans character that just won this amazing tournament? Don't forget about them, right? And so I think there's going to have to be like a movement even, like I'm thinking about like for instance, like Oscar's So White, like Game So White's going to happen. Gaming's even going to have its reckoning with hashtag Me Too because of, all these problematic kinds of things. So it's not like a beautiful space, for everybody to just come in. So I think there's a lot of work that, we still need to do. But the beautiful thing, I will say, is that if people could just like ignore, those kinds of the larger platforms, ignore the corporate entities that are like behind a lot of, pushing a lot of these platforms, we can still have beautiful communities. And that's like where a lot of my research is focusing on. I'm like, okay, and so most of the women of color, they're streaming with their, couple hundred people and they're having a great day, which a couple hundred folks in the stream is a great number, right?
Too, yeah.
It's a great number. And I think, that folks, a lot of folks just have to be content with that. But whenever we see like the model of like how much money could be made, and then we see how large, the following is for like a lot of these folks. And then when we see what the template is, that template, I'm thinking about, for instance, I remember hearing like a lot of stories of like early stories about like, for instance, like Ninja, and people would say he would steal people's content all the time. Like he would see somebody streaming and saying and doing certain things, and then he would bring in and, put that into like some of his streams. And, and that's a common practice, right? Of, people's content and everything being stolen. So I don't know, I'm not trying to, be on like I'm not anti-ninja. I don't really have like an opinion really about ninja, but a lot of the conversations around streaming often point back to PewDiePie and Ninja. So they are really these central figures like in this world, whether people like it or not, so, but I just think I like these platforms because we can do, folks can do what they want. And like, cause I could just get on and stream. I could have like a whole Black feminist, kind of stream and have people who are into that tune in. And then I don't have to worry about, those outside elements.
Well, Dr. Gray, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so much. You take care.